They say you should never mix business with pleasure, but let me tell you, when business becomes the pleasure of watching the people who destroyed your life squirm, it's a rule worth breaking. My name is Samuel, and this is the story of how my colleagues and I went from being fired to becoming our old boss's worst nightmare. If you've ever been made to feel small, disposable, or past your prime by someone with a fancy degree and no common sense, stick around. You're going to enjoy this. And while you're here, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what comes next. It started, as these things so often do, in a conference room that was too cold and smelled faintly of whiteboard cleaner and shattered dreams. The room was on the 20th floor of the Glass Spire, a building I'd worked in for 34 years. I knew its bones. I knew the specific groan the elevator made between the 10th and 11th floors. I knew the security guard at the front desk, Frank, had a daughter who had just graduated from nursing school. I had helped build the company housed within these walls, Aeroforge Dynamics, from a small, ambitious machine shop into a titan of the aerospace components industry, and now I was being told I was redundant. The man delivering the news was named Caspian Thorne. He was the kind of man who looked like he was born in a tailored suit. He had perfect teeth, a watch that cost more than my first house, and the sort of empty, predatory charisma that private equity firms love. He was the regional CEO for Apex Equity Partners, the firm that had bought Aeroforge from the founder's family 2 years prior. He used words like synergize, streamline, and right-sizing the talent portfolio. He never once used the word fired. He said, "Samuel, your contributions to this company are the stuff of legend." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were like two polished river stones, smooth and lifeless. But as we pivot towards a more agile, data-driven future, we've identified certain roles that are, shall we say, misaligned with our forward-looking operational matrix. I just sat there, my hands resting on the polished mahogany table. I didn't say a word. I'd seen this coming, in a way. Not for me specifically. But the chill had been in the air ever since Apex took over. They saw tradition as an inefficiency. They saw institutional knowledge as a liability, something that couldn't be quantified on a quarterly report. They saw loyalty as a weakness to be exploited. The room was filled with ghosts. I could almost see old Mr. Albright, the man who founded the company, sitting in the corner, his face a mask of disappointment. He'd hired me right out of engineering school, a handshake and a promise. "You take care of this company, Samuel," he'd said, "and it will take care of you." For 34 years, I'd kept my end of the bargain. Caspian slid a thick, leather-bound folder across the table. "This is your severance package. It's quite generous, as you'll see, a reflection of your long service." Generous, that was the word he used. I knew what it really was. It was hush money. It was a calculated number designed to be just large enough to make a lawsuit seem like an unattractive, messy alternative. I also knew what this was truly about. It wasn't about being misaligned. It was about my pension, and the pensions of 24 other senior managers, engineers, and division heads who were at that very moment sitting in identical cold conference rooms listening to identical speeches from Caspian's lieutenants. Our pension plan had a tiered vesting system. At 35 years of service, a massive kicker was applied, a legacy benefit from the Albright days that would have secured our retirements for life. I was 10 months away. Arthur Vance, our former CFO, was 7 months away. Eleanor Rigby in logistics, a year. We were the old guard, the expensive on-paper veterans who had built the place, and Apex had run the numbers. They had calculated down to the penny how much money they would save by cutting us loose before we crossed that finish line. It was a clear violation of the spirit, if not the letter, of labor law, specifically ERISA, which is supposed to protect against this exact kind of thing. But proving intent against a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm is a war of attrition, and they had more lawyers and more money than God. They were betting we'd take the severance and fade away. I looked at Caspian Thorne, at his smug, self-satisfied face. He expected me to argue, to plead, to get angry. He was braced for it, ready to deliver a final condescending blow about not being emotional, about this just being business. So I did none of those things. I looked at him, held his gaze until he started to look uncomfortable, and then I gave a slow, deliberate nod. "I understand," I said. My voice was calm even. It seemed to unnerve him more than any outburst could have. He blinked, a flicker of confusion in his reptilian eyes. "Good," he said, recovering quickly. "I'm glad you see the logic of the situation." "Oh, I do," I said, and a small, cold smile touched my lips. "The logic is perfectly clear." I stood up, leaving the unopened folder on the table. "I'll just need a box for my personal effects." Packing up 34 years doesn't take as long as you'd think. There were the photos of my wife, Eleanor, and our kids, a couple of industry awards, a scale model of the J47 turbine blade assembly I'd designed in the 90s, the one that had saved the company from bankruptcy during an industry downturn. I picked it up, feeling the cool, familiar weight of the metal in my hand. They called it a legend, but they were happy to throw it in a box. I saw Caspian watching me from the doorway of his glass-walled office, a smug little smirk on his face. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd just trimmed the fat, cleared a liability off his books. He had no idea what he had just done. He hadn't just fired an old engineer. He had just signed his own eviction notice. He just didn't know it yet. The drive home was a blur. I remember the city lights smearing across the windshield, the familiar rhythm of the streets feeling alien and hostile. I wasn't angry. The rage would come later, I was sure, but right then all I felt was a profound, cavernous emptiness. It was the feeling of being erased. 34 years of my life, of my sweat and my intellect, had been reduced to a line item on a spreadsheet, a rounding error in a private equity firm's profit margin. They didn't just take my job, they tried to take my history. I pulled into my driveway and just sat in the car for a long time, the engine ticking as it cooled. The house was dark except for the warm glow of the lamp in the living room window. Eleanor always left it on for me. For the first time in my adult life, I had no reason to get up in the morning. No problems to solve, no teams to lead, no deadlines to meet. The structure that had supported my entire identity had been kicked out from under me. When I finally walked inside, Eleanor was there. She took one look at my face and knew. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't offer platitudes or try to tell me it would be okay. She just came over, wrapped her arms around me, and held on. In that moment, her quiet, unwavering strength was the only thing keeping me from shattering into a million pieces. "They did it, then," she said softly into my shoulder. "They did it," I confirmed, my voice hoarse. We stood there for a long time. Later she made me a cup of tea, and I went down to my workshop in the basement. It's my sanctuary, a place of order and logic filled with the scent of sawdust and machine oil. In the center of the room, on a large workbench, was my current project, a grandfather clock I was restoring. It was an intricate, beautiful piece of machinery from the late 1800s, its brass gears and weights a complex ballet of physics and craftsmanship. I'd been working on it for months, slowly, methodically cleaning each gear, polishing each pivot, mending the delicate wooden case. Tonight I just stared at it. Its heart was silent, its hands frozen. A magnificent, complex system, dormant and useless without someone who understood how it worked. The metaphor was so painfully obvious it almost made me laugh. I was that clock. Arrowforge was that clock. And Caspian Thorne had just fired the only clockmaker who knew how to make it tick. My mind started to drift back, not just over the last 2 years of Apex's corrosive reign, but over the decades before. I remembered my first day. I was 24, fresh out of school, nervous and so eager to prove myself. Mr. Albright, the original owner, had a firm handshake and eyes that saw right through you. He wasn't an engineer, but he understood the soul of the business. He walked me through the shop floor himself, the roar of the lathes and mills a symphony to my young ears. He pointed to a massive, aging piece of German machinery. "That's the heart of this place," he'd said. "It's old, it's cantankerous, but it makes the best damn turbine casings on the planet. Learn its secret, Samuel, and you'll have a home here for life." I spent a year learning that machine. I took it apart and put it back together. I learned its quirks, its rhythms, its groans of protest. And then I made it better. I designed a new cutting head that reduced waste by 12% and increased output by 20%. Mr. Albright clapped me on the shoulder and gave me a bonus that, at the time, felt like a king's ransom. That was the ethos of the old Aeroforge. Competence was rewarded, innovation was celebrated, loyalty was a two-way street. I thought about the 2008 financial crisis. The aerospace industry was decimated. Our biggest client, a major commercial airline manufacturer, canceled a massive order overnight. We were weeks from insolvency. The board wanted to lay off half the workforce. I locked myself in my office for a week, fueled by stale coffee and sheer desperation. I went back to the drawing board on one of our oldest product lines, a series of small, high-stress engine brackets. Using a new alloy and a completely redesigned internal geometry, I created a version that was not only 30% stronger but 20% cheaper to manufacture. We could sell it for less and still make a higher margin. It was a lifeline. We didn't lay off a single person. We captured a new market, and within 2 years we were more profitable than ever. I didn't get a fancy title for it. I didn't get a press release. I got a quiet nod from Mr. Albright and the satisfaction of knowing the people I worked with still had jobs. That used to be enough. I remembered mentoring Arthur Vance. He came to us as a sharp young accountant, but he had the soul of an engineer. He was fascinated by the how of the business, not just the how much. I'd take him down to the R&D floor, show him the prototypes, explain the material science. He soaked it all up. He understood that the numbers on his spreadsheet weren't abstract figures, they were the real-world results of steel, sweat, and ingenuity. He rose to become the best CFO we ever had, someone who could balance a budget without breaking the company's spirit. He was one of the 24 they let go with me. And then I thought about the day the music died, the day the Albright family, after the old man passed away, decided to sell. They were good people, but they didn't have their father's passion for the business. They wanted a clean exit. Apex Equity Partners swept in with an offer that was too good to refuse. Caspian Thorne arrived like a conquering hero. He held a company-wide town hall in the main hangar. He spoke of a new chapter of growth, of unlocking shareholder value and leveraging our core competencies. It was a master class in saying nothing with a lot of expensive words. The older employees exchanged uneasy glances. We'd heard this language before. It was the language of asset strippers. The changes started small. They replaced our locally sourced coffee with a cheap, bitter sludge that tasted like despair. They implemented a new expense reporting system, so convoluted it seemed designed to discourage anyone from ever filing. Meetings multiplied like rabbits, all of them focused on cutting costs. They called it optimization. We called it strangulation. They started questioning everything. Why do we need this much redundancy in our server backups? Why are we using this premium-grade titanium when a cheaper alloy tests within acceptable parameters? They didn't understand that the redundancy was what kept us operational during a power surge, and the premium-grade titanium was why our parts never ever failed, which was the entire basis of our reputation. They saw us, the veterans, as dinosaurs, relics of an older, less efficient age. They couldn't quantify our 30 years of experience in a cell on their Excel sheet. They didn't understand that when a critical machine on the line went down, I could tell what was wrong just by the sound it made. They didn't understand that our relationships with our clients were built on decades of trust, not quarterly sales targets. They saw our salaries and our pending pensions not as a reward for a lifetime of value creation, but as a drag on their EBITDA. We were a problem to be solved. My phone buzzed, shaking me out of my reverie. It was a text, then another, and another, and a group chat had been started, an impromptu digital wake for the newly deceased careers of Aeroforge's senior staff. The names popped up one by one. Arthur Vance, CFO, 32 years. Eleanor Rigby, head of logistics, 28 years. David Chen, lead systems architect, 30 years. 25 names in total. A combined 750 years of experience, deleted in a single afternoon. The messages were a torrent of shock, anger, and fear. Can they do this? My pension. I was so close. I gave them my whole life. We should sue them into the ground. That last one was the dominant theme. Everyone wanted a lawyer. Everyone wanted blood. I understood the sentiment. I felt it myself, a low simmering heat starting to replace the cold emptiness. But I knew it was a fool's errand. A lawsuit would be their battlefield, not ours. They would drown us in paperwork, bleed us dry with legal fees, and delay for years until we were too broken and too poor to fight anymore. They were counting on us to take that path. Then a message from Arthur Vance, ever the pragmatist. A lawsuit is what they expect. It will take a decade and cost a fortune. We need a different approach. Another message from me. I typed it out slowly, my fingers feeling heavy. He's right. Fighting them on their terms is a losing game. We need to change the game. A flurry of replies. What do you mean, Samuel? What other option is there? I stared at the dormant grandfather clock in front of me. Its gears were inert, its potential locked away. But they were all there. The components were sound. It just needed to be wound up and set in motion by a steady hand. An idea, cold and clear and terrifyingly audacious, began to form in my mind. It was a long shot, a crazy gamble, but it was a language Caspian Thorne would understand. It wasn't about justice. It was about leverage. I typed back to the group. Everyone calm down, stop talking about lawyers. We need to meet in person tomorrow morning. There's a VFW hall on the west side that's quiet. 10 a.m. I have an idea. A moment of silence in the chat, and then Arthur's reply came through. I'll be there. One by one, the others chimed in. Affirmation after affirmation. The anger was still there, but now it was mixed with something else, a flicker of curiosity, a sliver of hope. I switched off the light in the workshop and went upstairs. Eleanor was asleep. I stood by the window, looking out at the quiet suburban street. The cold feeling was gone. In its place was a hard, dense knot of resolve. They had treated us like liabilities on a spreadsheet. They were about to find out that you can't just delete a liability. Sometimes it learns to fight back, and sometimes it buys your house and changes the locks. The next morning, the VFW hall smelled of stale beer, old wood, and righteous indignation. It was a dim, cavernous room, usually reserved for bingo nights and wedding receptions for people on a budget. Today, it was a war room. 25 of us sat around a collection of pushed-together folding tables. The faces in that room were a history of Aeroforge dynamics. I saw men and women who had designed, built, managed, and sold every significant product we had ever made. These weren't just colleagues, they were the people I'd spent more time with than my own family for the better part of 3 decades, and every single one of them looked like they'd just been punched in the gut. The air was thick with anger. The conversation was a chaotic mess of "I can't believe it" and "we have to do something." A few had already spoken to lawyers, and their reports were grim. The consensus was that we had a case, a strong moral one, but a difficult legal one. Proving age and pension discrimination was notoriously tough. The lawyers wanted massive retainers up front and offered no guarantees. They spoke of discovery, depositions, and a process that could take 5 to 7 years. It was exactly the trap I knew it would be. Finally, Arthur Vance stood up. He had a portable whiteboard he must have brought from home, and he started sketching out the financials of a lawsuit. The man could make numbers sing, and right now they were singing a funeral dirge. He broke down the estimated legal fees, the potential settlement amounts discounted by years of waiting, and the net result after taxes. His conclusion was brutal. Best case scenario, he said, tapping the board with a dry erase marker. After half a decade of fighting, we might each walk away with a quarter of what our pensions were worth. Maybe. And Apex's lawyers will have drained our life savings in the process. They're a $200 billion firm. They can afford to wait. We can't. This is a war of attrition. They are designed to win. A wave of despair washed over the room. He had just confirmed everyone's deepest fear. They were going to get away with it. The room fell silent, the only sound the hum of an old refrigerator in the corner. This was my moment. I stood up, all eyes turned to me. I wasn't a natural public speaker, but I had something more powerful than eloquence, a plan. Arthur is right, I began, my voice steady. Fighting them in court is like trying to punch the ocean. It's a waste of energy. They expect us to sue. They've planned for it. They've budgeted for it. They see it as a cost of doing business. I paused, letting that sink in. So we're not going to do what they expect. We're not going to fight them on their terms. We are going to change the battlefield entirely. I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of people I'd known for decades. They see us as a liability, a cost to be eliminated. My proposal is simple. We become an asset they need, an asset they can't control, and an asset that will own them. A few confused murmurs rippled through the group. For the last 2 years, I continued, I've kept in touch with the Albright Family Trust, Mr. Albright's children. They never wanted to be in the commercial real estate business. They sold the company, but they kept the building and the land it sits on. It was their father's first major asset, and they were sentimental about it. Apex Equity Partners is just a tenant, a very, very wealthy tenant, but a tenant nonetheless. Arthur's eyes widened slightly. He was starting to see it. Their lease agreement, which I may or may not have a copy of from my time overseeing the last facility expansion, is an old one. It was drafted in a different era. It's ironclad in most respects, but it has a fascinating little clause. Section 14, subsection B, it specifies that the lease can be terminated by the landlord with 60 days' notice in the event of a sale of the property to a third party, if that third party intends to perform significant capital improvements and renovations. It's a standard clause meant to protect a new owner who wants to tear down or completely gut a building. I let the silence hang in the air again. The Albright Trust is tired. They're tired of dealing with Caspian Thorne and his band of corporate pirates. They've told me as much. They want to sell the building. They just haven't wanted the hassle of listing it. I looked at Arthur, then at the rest of the group. Apex gave us all severance packages. Generous ones, as Caspian was so keen to point out. They meant it as a gag order. I propose we use it as a war chest. And then I laid it all out. The idea that had crystallized in my workshop the night before. We form a limited liability company, an LLC. We, the 25 of us, we pool our severance money, every dime. We use that as a down payment. We go to the bank, and with our combined financial strength and the intrinsic value of the property, we get a commercial mortgage. We make the Albright Trust a fair, fast, all-cash contingent offer they can't refuse. We buy the building. We become Apex Equity Partners' new landlord. The room was utterly, completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the grimy linoleum floor. People were staring at me as if I'd just suggested we build a rocket ship and fly to the moon. Then David Chen, our brilliant, perpetually skeptical systems architect, spoke up. Samuel, that's insane. We're engineers, not real estate moguls. What if they just move out? We'd be left holding a massive mortgage on an empty building. That's the beauty of it, David, I said, turning to him. First, it's not an empty building. It's a Class A commercial property in a thriving industrial park. Even if Apex leaves, we can release it, probably for more than they're paying now. Arthur can run the numbers, but I guarantee it's a sound investment on its own merits. Second, and more importantly, they can't move. I turned back to the group. Think about it. Aeroforge isn't just a bunch of offices. It's a high-tech manufacturing facility. It has clean rooms, specialized R&D labs, and heavy machinery with foundations sunk 10 feet into the concrete. You can't move that in 60 days. You couldn't move it in 6 months. It would take them a year, maybe 2, to find a suitable location, get the permits, retrofit the space, and move the equipment without crippling their entire operation. The disruption would cost them hundreds of millions of dollars. Their clients would defect. They would be ruined. A slow murmur started to build. It wasn't confusion anymore. It was the hum of gears starting to turn in 25 very smart, very experienced minds. Arthur Vance walked to the whiteboard, erased his bleak lawsuit calculations, and picked up a fresh marker. Give me the numbers, Samuel, he said, a glint in his eye I hadn't seen in years. What's the severance pool? What do you think the building will appraise for? For the next hour, the VFW hall transformed from a support group into a corporate boardroom. We went around the room. Each person stated their severance amount. Arthur tallied it on the board. The number was staggering. Apex had been very generous indeed. It was over $8 million. Arthur's pen flew across the whiteboard. He calculated a potential purchase price, loan-to-value ratios, estimated mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance. He projected a cash flow analysis under different scenarios. Apex stays and pays rent. Apex leaves and we have to release. He's right, Arthur finally said, stepping back from the board, which was now covered in a beautiful cascade of figures. It works. As a pure real estate play, it's solid. The risk is manageable. With Apex as a captive tenant, the potential return is astronomical. Maria Flores, who had run our international sales division for 20 years, spoke up. She was a shrewd negotiator and her voice cut through the chatter. I like it. It's poetic. But what do we call this company of ours? I smiled. I was thinking of something simple, something that reminds us of why we're doing this. I was thinking we call it Redundant Resolutions, LLC. A wave of laughter, the first real, genuine laughter I'd heard from this group in 24 hours, filled the room. It was the laughter of people who had just been handed a weapon. The fear in the room had been replaced by a cold, electric excitement. The debate shifted from if to how. Sarah Jenkins, our former head of in-house legal, who had also been unceremoniously dumped, stepped forward. I can draft the LLC operating agreement by the end of the day. We'll need to set up a corporate bank account and have everyone wire their funds. It needs to be clean, untouchable. We spent the rest of the day planning. We formed a board of directors for the LLC with me as chairman and Arthur as treasurer. We delegated tasks. We were a well-oiled machine, slipping back into the professional roles we had perfected over decades. This was what we did. We solved complex problems. And Caspian Thorne had just become the most satisfyingly complex problem of our careers. As the meeting broke up, people were shaking my hand, clapping me on the back. The slumped shoulders were gone. The 1,000-yard stares had been replaced by focused, determined glints. We had a purpose again. We weren't victims anymore. We were hunters. That evening, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. This is Chloe from R&D. I heard what they did. It's disgusting. I worked under you for 3 years. You taught me everything. If you need a friend on the inside, I'm here. Just say the word. Chloe was a brilliant young engineer, one of the few new hires who seemed to have the old Aeroforge spirit. I'd taken her under my wing. Apex hadn't fired her. She was young, ambitious, and cheap. A perfect soldier for their new army. But her loyalty, it seemed, wasn't to them. I texted back a simple reply. Thank you, Chloe. Stay safe. Just keep your eyes and ears open for now. Having an inside source wasn't part of the original plan, but I was quickly learning that in this new game you take every advantage you can get. The structure was being built, brick by methodical brick. The foundation was sound, and soon, very soon, we were going to ring the bell. The next few weeks were a masterclass in silent, coordinated action. We moved with the quiet efficiency of a team that had worked together for decades. Sarah, our legal eagle, had the LLC paperwork filed within 48 hours. Redundant Resolutions LLC was officially a legal entity. Arthur established a relationship with a commercial banker at a regional bank, one who was eager for a major deal and didn't have deep ties to the Wall Street giants that backed Apex. The most delicate part of the operation was pooling the money. We were talking about people's life savings, the money they were supposed to retire on, one by one, 25 wire transfers ranging from $100,000 to nearly $500,000 landed in the newly opened corporate account. It was an incredible act of trust, a testament to the bonds we'd forged over a lifetime of working together. We weren't just colleagues, we were a cohort, bound by a shared history and a shared sense of betrayal. While Arthur and Sarah handled the legal and financial architecture, I made the most important call of my life. I dialed the number for the Albright Family Trust. It was Mr. Albright's eldest son, Robert, who picked up. Samuel, my goodness, it's been too long, he said, his voice warm and familiar. I heard about what those vultures at Apex did. Disgraceful. My father would be spinning in his grave. That's partly why I'm calling, Robert, I said. I know you and your siblings have been thinking about selling the building. I'm calling to tell you not to list it. I have a buyer for you. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Oh, who's the party? Another one of these private equity ghouls? No, I said, a smile spreading across my face. The party is me, and Arthur Vance and David Chen and Maria Flores and 21 other people your father would have called the heart and soul of this company. I explained the plan. I didn't have to sell him on the justice of it. He understood that immediately. His only concern was the legitimacy of the offer. That's where Arthur's meticulous work paid off. I walked Robert through our financing, our capital, and our appraisal estimates. So you're telling me, Robert said, and I could hear the grin in his voice, that you're going to use their own money to buy the building out from under them, and then what? Kick them out? We plan to be very responsible landlords, I said carefully. Our first act will be to inform our new tenant of our extensive renovation plans. Robert let out a booming laugh. Oh, this is beautiful. This is something my father would have cooked up. Samuel, send the offer. Consider it accepted. Nothing would give me more pleasure than signing that deed over to you. The deal moved with astonishing speed. The Albright Trust was motivated and we were organized. We did our due diligence. The building passed inspection with flying colors and our financing was approved. 3 weeks after the VFW Hall meeting, the 25 members of Redundant Resolutions LLC gathered in a sterile law office to sign the closing documents. We were now officially the owners of the glass spire at 1200 Forge Drive, the corporate headquarters of Aero Forge Dynamics. We didn't celebrate with champagne. We just sat there for a moment, the signed papers stacked neatly on the table. We had crossed the Rubicon. There was no going back. We had just bet everything on this one. Audacious move. The next morning was a Tuesday. I remember the weather was perfect, clear blue sky, a crisp autumn air, a perfect day for a corporate decapitation. Our lawyer had hired a professional process server, a tall, imposing man who looked like he moonlighted as a bouncer. His instructions were simple: deliver the legal notice directly into the hands of Mr. Caspian Thorne and no one else. The notice itself was a work of art drafted by Sarah. It was a formal, legally impeccable letter informing the tenant, Aero Forge Dynamics, a subsidiary of Apex Equity Partners, that their lease was being terminated under Section 14, subsection B. It gave them 60 days to vacate the premises to allow for comprehensive structural and systems renovations planned by the new ownership. The new ownership was listed simply as Redundant Resolutions LLC with our lawyer's address for all correspondence. At 10:15 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text from Chloe, our inside source. Holy hell, Samuel, you need to see this. Attached was a photo. It was blurry, clearly taken in haste from across a large boardroom, but the image was unmistakable. Caspian Thorne was standing at the head of a table, his face a mask of purple fury, waving a piece of paper in the air. The process server was visible in the background, a stoic statue watching the chaos he had unleashed. A second text came through. He got served in the middle of a quarterly review with the New York partners on video conference. He started screaming. I've never seen anything like it. He's yelling about corporate terrorism and illegal seizure. Nobody knows who Redundant Resolutions is. The partners in New York look like they're watching a car crash. A slow, grim smile spread across my face. The first domino had fallen. For the next 24 hours we heard nothing. It was the calm before the storm. We knew they would be scrambling, their legal team tearing the lease agreement apart, looking for a loophole, a weakness, any way out. Our group chat was a flurry of nervous energy, but we held the line. Stick to the plan. All communications go through the lawyer. Say nothing. The first official response came a day later. It was a cease and desist letter, thick with legal threats and bluster, delivered by courier to our lawyer's office. It called our termination notice frivolous, malicious, and without legal merit. It accused us of tortious interference and threatened immediate legal action for damages that would run into the hundreds of millions. Sarah, our lawyer, didn't even bother to write a lengthy reply. She simply scanned the first page of the signed deed of sale, showing our LLC as the new owner, and a copy of the highlighted Section 14, subsection B from their own lease. She emailed the PDF to Apex's general counsel with a single sentence: "We trust this clarifies the matter." The silence that followed this was even more profound. It was the silence of an army that has just realized its fortifications are made of paper. Chloe's text painted a picture of pure, unadulterated panic inside the glass spire. Caspian Thorne was, in her words, unhinged. He was holding marathon meetings, screaming at his staff, demanding to know how this could have happened. He'd ordered his facilities manager to find a new location immediately. The manager had apparently laughed in his face, explaining that a move of this scale was a 2-year project. The genius of our plan was its simplicity. We hadn't done anything illegal. We hadn't hacked their systems or stolen their clients. We had simply engaged in a free and fair market transaction. We had used their own weapon, capital, against them. They were so focused on the assets inside the company that they never once thought to secure the building that housed them all. It was the kind of colossal, arrogant oversight that only a new money MBA who had never built anything in his life could make. The real panic began to set in at the end of the first week. The New York partners, the real power at Apex, were apparently furious with Thorne for letting this happen on his watch. He was on the hot seat. He had to fix it. His first desperate move was to try and go around us. He sent a team to the Albright Family Trust, offering to buy the building from them for 10% above what we had paid. Robert Albright called me that evening. "You're not going to believe this, Samuel. Thorne sent 3 guys in suits to my office. Looked like they came straight from a gangster movie. They made me an offer." "What did you tell them?" I asked. "I told them that, unfortunately, I had already sold the property, and that even if I hadn't, I'd rather burn it to the ground than sell it to the soulless bastards who desecrated my father's legacy." Checkmate. The building was ours. The lease was terminated. The 60-day clock was ticking. Their fortress had become their prison. And we, the redundant, the old, the disposable, were the wardens. The second week after we dropped the bomb was when the power shift became palpable, not just in their panic, but in the actions of others. The story, despite our silence, had begun to leak, not to the press, but through the tight-knit network of the aerospace industry. It started as whispers at supply chain conferences and in the comments section of industry blogs. An anonymous rumor about the new owners of the Aeroforge building. The narrative was intoxicatingly simple. The old guard that Apex had ruthlessly purged had turned the tables in the most spectacular way imaginable. We became legends overnight. We were the ghosts who came back to haunt the castle. This had an unintended but welcome consequence. The talent inside Aeroforge, the people who hadn't been fired but who had watched in disgust as we were marched out the door, started to act. Chloe's text became a running commentary on a slow-motion corporate collapse. Dr. Aris Thorne, no relation, thank God, head of R&D, just resigned. He walked into Caspian's office and told him he refused to work for an organization with the ethical compass of a sewer rat. The whole department is in shock. Dr. Aris Thorne was a genius, a man responsible for half of our active patents. Losing him was like a football team losing its star quarterback. 2 days later, Mark and Gian from the Boeing account are gone. They resigned together, handed in their laptops, and walked out. That account is 30% of our annual revenue. They were loyal to you and Arthur, not to Apex. It was a talent exodus. The best and brightest, the ones with options, were running for the lifeboats. They weren't just leaving a company, they were making a moral choice. They didn't want to be associated with Caspian Thorne and his brand of predatory capitalism. Our little act of defiance had become a catalyst, a signal to everyone else that you didn't have to just sit there and take it. Competence isn't cheap, and Apex was losing all of theirs in a spectacular fire sale. Caspian Thorne must have been feeling the pressure from his bosses in New York because his strategy shifted from legal threats to desperate manipulation. My phone rang one evening from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but my curiosity got the better of me. "Samuel." The voice was strained, attempting a friendly tone that sounded utterly false. It was Caspian Thorne. "This is he," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. Samuel, listen, he began, the faux friendliness dripping from every word. I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding, a failure to communicate. I want to make things right. I said nothing. I just let him talk, let the silence hang on the line like a weight. What you and your associates have done is, well, it's unorthodox, I'll give you that, he continued, his voice tightening. But I admire the initiative. It's the kind of outside-the-box thinking we at Apex value. I almost laughed. The man was so steeped in his own brand of corporate doublespeak he probably believed what he was saying. Look, I'm prepared to be very generous. Let's talk about a consulting agreement. A big one. I want to bring you back, Samuel, as a special advisor to help us transition. We can make this whole building situation go away. We can make you whole on your pension. We can make this right. He was offering me a bribe, a personal payday to betray the other 24 people who had trusted me with their life savings. He thought my loyalty, my integrity, had a price tag. It was the most insulting thing he had said to me yet, even more so than calling me redundant. I let the silence stretch for another 10 seconds, just to make him sweat. Then I spoke, my voice as cold and hard as milled steel. Mr. Thorne, I said, putting a deliberate emphasis on the formal title, you seem to be under the impression that you are speaking to an individual. You are not. You are speaking to the chairman of Redundant Resolutions, LLC. Any and all official communication regarding the property at 1200 Forge Drive should be directed to our legal counsel. Her contact information was on the notice we provided you. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Now, if you'll excuse me, I continued, I am having dinner with my family. Goodbye. I hung up the phone before he could reply. I looked across the dinner table at my wife Eleanor. She had been watching me, a small, knowing smile on her face. Was that him? She asked. That was him, I confirmed. What did he want? He wanted to buy my soul, I said. I told him it wasn't for sale. The power had shifted completely. We weren't the ones who were desperate anymore. We held all the cards. The building, the lease, the ticking clock, and most importantly, we had something Caspian Thorne could never buy, the moral high ground. He was a man in a prison of his own making, and the walls were closing in day by day. After Thorne's pathetic attempt to bribe me failed, a week of profound, terrified silence emanated from the glass spire. The clock was ticking. They were down to just over 30 days. The talent bleed was becoming a hemorrhage. We heard through back channels that they'd tried to get an emergency injunction from a judge to halt the eviction, but the judge had apparently laughed their lawyers out of the courtroom, pointing out that it was a simple commercial lease dispute, and they were welcome to move out if they didn't like the terms of their own contract. Finally, the official request came, not to me, but to our lawyer, just as I had instructed. Apex Equity Partners formally requested a meeting with the Board of Redundant Resolutions, LLC, to discuss a mutually beneficial path forward regarding the lease at 1200 Forge Drive. The day of the meeting, we didn't choose our lawyer's office. We rented the main conference room at a neutral hotel. It was a large, imposing space with a massive dark wood table that could seat 30. We made sure we got there first, all 25 of us, the fired, the redundant, the old guard. We took our seats on one side of the table, a silent wall of gray hair and steely resolve. We didn't talk, we just waited. Caspian Thorne arrived exactly on time, flanked by two lawyers who looked pale and overworked. He had lost his slick, predatory sheen. His suit looked rumpled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He stopped dead in the doorway when he saw us, all of us. He had expected to negotiate with me, or maybe a small committee. He had not expected to face a jury of his victims. He and his lawyers took their seats opposite us. The silence in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. One of his lawyers, a younger man who looked terrified, cleared his throat and began, "On behalf of our client, we are here today to open a dialogue." Arthur Vance cut him off, not rudely, but with the firm, unimpeachable authority of a man who knows he has all the power. "With all due respect, counselor, we're past the point of dialogue. Your client has had our notice for nearly a month. They are in violation of the vacating clause of their lease. We are here to listen to a proposal, that's all. Thorne shot Arthur a venomous look. He was clearly not used to being spoken to this way. He gestured for his lawyer to be quiet and leaned forward, trying to regain control. "All right, let's cut the theatrics," he said, his voice a low growl. "You've made your point. It was a clever move, I admit it. Now what's your price?" "We are prepared to make you a significant offer to purchase the building. Name a number. Let's make this go away today." A low chuckle went through our side of the table. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table, mirroring his posture from that day in the cold conference room. I spoke for the first time. "Mr. Thorne, I believe you're still operating under a misapprehension. The building is not for sale." His jaw tightened. "Everything is for sale. What do you want?" "What do we want?" I repeated, letting the question hang in the air. I looked down the line of my friends and colleagues. I saw the faces of people who had given their entire adult lives to a company, only to be tossed aside like trash. "We want what is fair. We want what we have earned." I slid a single, elegantly bound document across the polished table. It stopped directly in front of him. "We are prepared to offer you a new lease," I said calmly. "Since you are so fond of long-term planning, we've made it a 5-year triple net lease. All taxes, insurance, and maintenance will be your responsibility, of course." Thorne opened the document. His eyes scanned the first page. I watched as the blood drained from his face. He went from pale to a ghostly white. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with disbelief and fury. "This is insane," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You've quadrupled the rent." "It's the current market rate for a property of this unique nature," Arthur interjected smoothly. "We had it professionally appraised. It's a very fair price. And this," Thorne stabbed a finger at the second page of the document. "This pension restoration and dignity bonus, what in God's name is this?" "That," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, "is a one-time, non-negotiable signing bonus payable to the LLC upon execution of the lease. You'll find the amount is a very specific number. It is, down to the dollar, the exact combined value of the 35-year pension kickers that the members of this LLC were denied when you terminated our employment." Thorne shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is extortion. It's illegal. I'll have you all in jail." This time it was Sarah Jenkins, our lawyer, who spoke. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but it had an edge of pure ice. "Mr. Thorne, I'd advise you to choose your words carefully. Extortion is a serious criminal accusation. What we have presented you with is a standard commercial lease agreement. You are, of course, free to reject it, in which case we will expect you to have vacated the premises in 31 days. If your property is not removed by then, we will be forced to have it professionally removed and stored, at your expense, of course. We will then lease the building to a new tenant. I believe several of your competitors have already made informal inquiries." That was the final blow. The mention of competitors. Thorne looked like he'd been physically struck. He sank back into his chair, defeated. He was trapped. If he refused, the company would be paralyzed and the board would crucify him. If he accepted, he would be paying a king's ransom to the very people he had tried to discard. He would be admitting on paper the exact value of the experience he had deemed worthless. I leaned forward one last time. "You taught us a valuable lesson, Caspian," I said softly, so only he could hear. "This is just business. You identify an asset, you secure it. We are simply following the logic of the situation. You have 31 days. We all stood up in unison. We turned and walked out of the room, leaving him and his lawyers sitting there in stunned, humiliated silence. We didn't look back. We didn't need to. We had already won. 2 weeks later, a courier delivered the signed lease agreement to our lawyer's office. The wire transfer for the pension restoration and dignity bonus hit our LLC's bank account the same day. We didn't get our pensions back. We got something better. We got our money, our dignity, and the profound, enduring satisfaction of knowing that the company we built now paid us rent just to exist. Our life's work was now our annuity, funded by the arrogance of the man who tried to steal it. 6 months after that, we read in the Wall Street Journal that Caspian Thorne had been separated from Apex Equity Partners due to a restructuring of the regional leadership. The official reason cited was a significant loss of shareholder value and operational control at one of their key portfolio companies. They didn't name Aeroforge, but we knew. They had to cut out the cancer. I'm back in my workshop now. The grandfather clock is finished. It stands in the corner of my living room, its polished brass pendulum swinging in a steady, hypnotic rhythm. Its chimes ring out deep and resonant on the hour. It keeps perfect time. A complex system restored to its purpose by a patient hand. It's a reminder that some things of value are built slowly over years and cannot be easily replaced. They thought we were redundant. They saw us as old furniture, liabilities to be cleared off the books, but they forgot that sometimes the old furniture is structural. It's the very thing holding the whole house up. They mistook our loyalty for weakness and our experience for a cost. But loyalty has its limits, and experience, well, experience has a price. They just didn't want to pay it, so we sent them the bill. And that's the real moral of this story. It's not just about a building or a lease. It's about knowing your own value, especially when the people who sign your checks have forgotten it. Your knowledge, your relationships, your years of dedication, that is your real capital. It's an asset they can't see on a spreadsheet, but it's the most powerful one you have. Never let anyone tell you you're redundant. You're not a liability. You're the foundation. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever felt overlooked or underestimated, do me a favor, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own worth, and make sure you subscribe, because there are a lot more stories to tell about competence getting the last laugh. Let me know in the comments below, what would you have done? Would you have sued, or would you have bought the building? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for listening.